Now tonight we are pulling together news and analysis of the governorship elections that took place in Imo, Kogi and Bayelsa States over the weekend. Those elections were seen as an important test of confidence in the electoral system here in Nigeria after the fiercely contested presidential ballot in February and the disputes and legal battles that followed. This time, once again, sporadic violence and vote rigging have marred the off-season elections, with political rivalries flaring despite travel restrictions and the mass deployment of police with army backup. At least 2 people were shot dead by police. One was reportedly running off with a ballot box. Someone said that elections in Nigeria are like the dragon fire of the Game of Thrones and the Ballad of Snakes and the Hunger Games all rolled into one, only infinitely more chaotic. Why is it that Nigeria simply can't hold verifiably free and fair elections? And what is the future of elections in this extraordinary country? Well, for his assessment, I'm joined now in the studio by the constitutional lawyer, Clement Nwankwo, who is one of Nigeria's top election analysts and is the founding convener of the Civil Society Election Monitoring Situation Room. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles.
You, as I mentioned, the founding convener of the respected Civil Society Situation Room. They monitor elections, and you are still, of course, a part of it. You were monitoring this last election. What is your verdict on this off-season governorship election that took place in Imo, Kogi and Bayelsa States?
The Situation Room has issued a statement on these elections. The verdict is very unequivocal, which is that this was a huge disappointment. We had thought that given the disappointment with the 2023 general elections, that there would have been some effort by INEC to do a better job. But apparently this is a worse job. And I think for all of us, it is extremely sad to see elections conducted this way in this country. It brings to question how this democracy will continue, how this democracy will thrive, if we cannot give citizens the option of deciding who rules them. The electoral system in this country has collapsed, and we have to go back to the drawing board. Certainly we can't build anything on what is now. The system has been captured, and it is delivering incredibly sad results, not in terms of who wins or who doesn't win, but in terms of the process, in terms of the abuses of the process, in terms of citizens' lack of confidence in elections as a way of running a referendum on those who have ruled them or given a chance for people to take over. The country has lost its electoral system, and we certainly can only revive it if citizens ask the right questions and make the demands that should be made. When you look at the elections and you look at the fact that before the elections, those who are given responsibility for the running of the elections have been seen to be people who have been compromised, where partisan political elements are appointed into the Electoral Commission, where staff of the Electoral Commission and officials of the Electoral Commission have basically allocated themselves to serve political interests, then I think that where we are today is a very sad one. And this country's democracy cannot go any further with the kind of election administration system that we have in place today.
And we appreciate the fact that people like yourself, the Situation Room, and many other civil society groups keep the eye of a hawk, if you like, on these things and are able to do the kind of analysis that you're talking about. But beyond the sort of broad strokes of it, would you say that in terms of specific things, I mean, bread and butter issues, poverty, corruption, as well as violence were at the heart of this election?
I think certainly bread and butter issues relates to who can help to halt the slide that the country is descending into. Certainly when you look at people's conditions, you see a worse trend than previously, and it doesn't look like there's anything in the horizon that promises a break from the fall. So I think for people it's a major issue. But beyond that is the fact that those who are seeking political power are taking advantage of the huge poverty that has descended on the land, and are now basically taking advantage of that, buying the elections, paying people off to vote for them. Vote buying is incredibly at an unmitigated proportion. So it's like people struggle so hard to purchase the election. They struggle so hard when they purchase the election to use the proceeds of being in office to buy the next elections. So in reality, my point of view is that we perhaps have come to a dead end with the present electoral system, and we must ask ourselves what lies ahead.
Right, but are you then suggesting that the results manifested themselves in such a way as to suggest that incumbents use their power? Because incumbents won in all 3 states.
Incumbents won in all 3 states, which is really not unexpected in a normal electoral system. But we don't have evidence that people voted freely. You set up a process. You decide that people go to vote. You decide that election results are calculated, tabulated, collated at the polling units, and then escalates to the different levels of collation. You expect that at the immediate primary units, where you have the polling units, that immediately results are counted, the result sheets are uploaded, and people can see that real time. In these results, in these elections, we saw results being readied before the elections. We are doing analysis of what has been uploaded, and there's a huge discrepancy in what has been uploaded.
You mean uploaded to IREV?
To the IREV.
Right.
So the whole idea of the IREV was that IREV was supposed to be real life uploading of results. But now it looks like, given that there was a huge question about the efficiency of IREV, it's now become just another tool to upload whatever it is you
whenever
choose.
You feel like.
Whenever you
and
feel
not
like.
in real time.
Not real time, not real results.
Right.
So there is a major question where we are with elections in this country.
Well, that's a very important point you make. And as I said, once again, coming from people like yourself, it's very important for us to listen very attentively to what you're saying. It's amazing, isn't it, how politicians who are supposed to protect and uphold the integrity and the values of this country have become the ones who have infiltrated this country, if I could use that term, and have decimated every institution in it, not least the ones that have to do with elections. Is that an exaggeration, or is that a fair assessment of the way things are in Nigeria?
No, it's certainly not an exaggeration, and you can see that from what has played out with the elections. You can see that with what has played out with the reports of election observers. The media, thankfully, has been very dutiful in putting out these reports in real time. So it looks like everything sacred have been desecrated by the politicians and by those given responsibility to uphold their sacredness. And that's the point that I make. If all of these institutions are failing, if the politicians have found a way of manipulating it, if so much public funds is taken out of the public treasury to buy election results, and that's why you would say an incumbent would win, because they have access to unparalleled resources.
They hold the purse strings.
They hold the purse. So whether it's an incumbent from an opposition party or an incumbent from a ruling party, it's the same traits.
Yes. So how can Nigeria get out of this explosion of irregularities, corruption, and violence in elections?
I think in 2007, when incredible elections incredibly horrible elections were conducted in this country.
That's when President Yar'Adua
This was when
came
President
into office.
Yar'Adua of blessed memory came into office. He came into office and he said, I'm really sorry, Nigerians. These election results that brought me into office lack credibility. Now, let us see how we can pull ourselves from where we were. And that was how come the Election Reform Committee was set up, headed by Justice Mohammed Lawal Uwais. And this had several members, including Professor Tahiru Jega, who later became the chairman of the Electoral Commission. But that president understood what went wrong, admitted it, and called people to conversation. So that was one way. And I think that we in civil society, we as citizens of this country, must raise our voices to say that this electoral system has collapsed. We can't trust those you have appointed into office. You have appointed your political acolytes. You've put them into management of elections. So we don't trust the electoral system anymore. We don't trust the officials, we don't trust the commission, and we don't trust that this process will help us save our democracy. And to save this democracy, this administration must come to the realization that citizens have no more confidence.
Well, I was going to
elections.
ask you that. Do you detect the will in this new President Bola Tinubu to do something about cleaning up the electoral process? Or maybe it hasn't come up at all. And if he does, whether he can actually achieve this, whether he or anyone has a chance of fixing such an overwhelmingly corrupt system.
There were recent nominations of state resident electoral commissioners, and this was approved within a few minutes by the plenary at the National Assembly. Now, those nominations, several of them should never have been made because of the political feints of some of those that were in that list. And for me, that's a very sad signal. But whether the administration likes it or not, whether this president likes it or not, I think it's important that he listens to what Nigerians are saying, which is that this system has failed. And if this system has failed, and you still have a couple of off-cycle elections, about 4 or 5, leading up to 2027, it's only going to get worse. And in 2027, I don't know whether it can be called elections. It certainly won't be if this trajectory continues. And at that stage, it will become clear, even to the president at that stage, that this country's democracy is on its tethers and will drop and collapse. But certainly what we have today cannot take us to the next general elections.
Right. I know you mentioned the Justice Uwais report, but what steps would you propose to start to effect change and to fight corruption in elections? What array of policies would you recommend? Because I imagine that the government would have to come up with public policies, with INEC policies, with security policies, and the judiciary, and doing all the things that a government should do to guarantee the sanctity of elections.
I think there's been several recommendations made. One is with the Electoral Commission itself. I think that what we have today as an Electoral Commission needs to be set aside in a legal way. The National Assembly needs to be brought into this conversation. The President needs to go back to several of the reports and set up a committee that has people, stakeholders, who sit down and decide which aspects of these past recommendations needs to now begin to be implemented.
And which needs to be brushed up and all the rest of it.
Yes, and the most important is the method and process of appointment of election management team. And I think that you have to go back to the drawing board to start this process. I do not think that the election management team as it exists today can take this country to the next step.
And basically, by election management, you mean INEC?
I mean
the
INEC,
Electoral Commission,
at all levels.
INEC, right.
You need to have a new system that creates a new electoral commission, that creates a new election management team, and follows the process that have been outlined in various recommendations that have been made, especially the Ways Committee reports that have indicated how you can appoint an INEC chairman, how you can appoint INEC national commissioners. And indeed, we have to go back to the question whether you indeed need resident electoral commissioners. Because where governors send names of nominees to be appointed recs, or where a political party
that
does
raises
so,
a lot of questions.
What it does is really just destroys the system. And that's why you have the resident electoral commissioners acting with arbitrariness, without responsibility, and without accountability. We have to do this even before the next off-cycle elections. But certainly we can't go on with this type of election management body, and we can't go on with this sort of abused electoral process. This democracy will collapse very soon if we don't check the nature of election management system that we have in this country, because citizens have lost faith totally in elections in this country.
Very, very profound what you're saying, particularly for a country like Nigeria that is supposed to be a symbol and a signal to the rest of Africa. But are those policies in themselves going to be enough, or would the government have to go back to social policies? Because we know that corruption and electoral malpractice thrive when there's poverty.
There is poverty. You're not going to solve poverty quite quickly, but you can fix your election system quite quickly. And when people understand that they can vote without the process being abused, then you begin to see better elected officials respond better to citizens' demands. But if we say that the major thing, if we blame the abuses entirely on citizens and refuse to do what we need to do in terms of policy change, in terms of legal changes, in terms of constitutional changes, then we would have to pray, and it's a difficult word to use, but we would have to pray that this democracy survives.
Well, God isn't going to come from heaven and fix the democracy for
God
you.
has given us too
He's
much
given
chances.
you everything that you need to fix it yourself.
Exactly.
So, I mean, beyond sort of the allusion to God and obviously the need, very important points you make about what needs to be done urgently. What optimistic note can you sound for us from your observation and analysis of this election?
I think it's difficult to be very optimistic about these elections. I think what surprised quite a few people is, even though there was a low turnout, what surprised quite a lot of people was even that the turnout was as much as it was, even though it was low, which means that citizens are saying...
It was dramatically low,
yes,
wasn't it?
Yeah, but there is still people saying, look, we could have confidence in elections if you fix it. So in some ways, people have not totally given up on the electoral system, but it wouldn't go on for too long. In fact, it wouldn't go on till 2027. It wouldn't.
And these points that you make, which are very important, very poignant, and very pointed remarks, are they incorporated in the civil society situation room report?
It is incorporated
in very stark terms.
In very stark terms, the situation room report today, and there was a press conference addressed by the convener, Yunus Yao, which basically made the point that these elections represent a huge disappointment, and this country cannot continue on this trajectory. That's very clear.
Clement, I want to thank you very much indeed, and I want to thank you for consistently standing up for what is right in this country, and for, of course, being a founding convener of the civil society election monitoring situation room, in addition, of course, to being a respected constitutional lawyer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.